If she's really innocent, then why is a police officer walking straight toward her? The question spread through the auditorium in nervous whispers just seconds before everything changed. The spring sunlight poured through the tall glass windows of Jefferson High School, casting long golden beams across rows of folding chairs packed with students, parents, teachers, and local officials. It was Honor Scholars Day, the biggest academic celebration of the year. Cameras flashed. Proud families smiled. The school band had just finished playing the national anthem. On stage, a massive blue banner stretched across the back wall, displaying the words excellence, leadership, and integrity in bold white letters. 17-year-old Ava Johnson sat in the front row wearing a navy blazer and a silver honor cord draped neatly around her neck. Her hands rested calmly in her lap. Her name was scheduled to be called in less than 5 minutes. Valedictorian candidate. Debate champion. Volunteer tutor. The student everyone expected to succeed. She glanced toward the audience and spotted an empty seat reserved for her mother. A small crease formed between her brows. Naomi Johnson was never late. Not for anything important. Ava checked her phone one more time. No message. No missed call. Just as she slipped the phone back into her purse, movement near the auditorium entrance caught her attention. A uniformed officer stepped inside. Then another. Conversations softened. Heads turned. The mood shifted almost instantly. Officer Daniel Briggs entered with the confidence of someone accustomed to commanding attention. His polished badge reflected the overhead lights. His expression remained unreadable as he moved down the center aisle. Parents exchanged confused looks. Teachers straightened in their seats. Even Principal Harris stopped speaking mid-sentence. The microphone crackled softly in the sudden silence. Briggs never looked left or right. His eyes remained fixed on a single person. Ava. The distance between them seemed to shrink with every measured step. Ava felt her stomach tighten. She had never spoken to Officer Briggs before. Yet something about the way he was approaching made the air feel heavier. Around her, students began whispering. Some raised their phones. Others simply stared. The officer stopped directly in front of her chair. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The entire auditorium seemed frozen in place. Somewhere in the back, a program booklet slipped from someone's hands and landed on the floor with a soft slap. Briggs finally broke the silence. Ava Johnson? His voice carried far beyond the first row. Ava stood slowly. Yes, sir. Briggs reached into a folder tucked beneath his arm. Several people leaned forward. The principal stepped down from the stage. A teacher near the front looked visibly concerned. Ava's heart pounded against her ribs, but her face remained composed. Briggs opened the folder and looked directly at her. You need to come with me. A collective gasp swept through the auditorium. Phones immediately rose into the air. Parents exchanged stunned expressions. The honor ceremony had stopped. The applause. The smiles. The celebration. All gone in an instant. And standing beneath a banner that promised integrity, Ava suddenly found herself at the center of a moment that would change far more than her future. Ava could feel hundreds of eyes following her as she stepped away from her chair. The honor cord resting against her blazer suddenly felt heavier than it had a minute earlier. Around her, whispers rolled through the auditorium like distant thunder. Some students looked confused. Others looked frightened. A few simply stared at their phones, recording every second. Principal Harris moved quickly across the stage and lowered the microphone. His polished dress shoes echoed against the hardwood floor. Officer Briggs, he said carefully, perhaps we should discuss this privately. Briggs did not take his eyes off Ava. This matter cannot wait. The words landed hard in the growing silence. Ava swallowed slowly and forced herself to breathe. Her mother had taught her that panic never solved anything. Facts did. Truth did. She lifted her chin and met the officer's gaze. "May I ask what this is about?" she said. Her voice remained calm despite the knot tightening in her stomach. Briggs opened the folder. Again. The fluorescent lights overhead reflected off several printed pages clipped inside. "There are questions regarding unauthorized access to state examination materials," he said. Gasps spread through the front rows. A teacher near the aisle covered her mouth. Ava blinked once. Then again. For a moment she wondered if she had heard him correctly. Unauthorized access? Examination materials? None of it made sense. She had spent months preparing for the state academic competition. Every practice session. Every late night. Every weekend at the library. She had earned every achievement listed beside her name. "There has to be a mistake," Principal Harris said. "Ava is one of our strongest students." Briggs remained unmoved. "That will be determined later." The officer's certainty unsettled the room. It was not the certainty of someone asking questions. It was the certainty of someone who believed he already had answers. Ava glanced toward the empty seat reserved for her mother. Still empty. Her chest tightened. Naomi Johnson always knew what to say during difficult moments. Always knew how to untangle confusion and separate assumptions from facts. But she was not here. Not yet. Across the auditorium, several parents exchanged uneasy looks. One reporter from the local newspaper quietly entered through the side door after hearing the commotion. The clicking of a camera lens briefly cut through the silence. Ava noticed everything. The nervous shifting in chairs. The lowered voices. The way some students suddenly avoided eye contact. In less than 2 minutes, years of hard work seemed to be dissolving beneath suspicion. Yet something inside her refused to break. She remembered sitting at the kitchen table when she was 12 years old while her mother reviewed legal documents late into the night. Naomi had looked up from a stack of papers and said something Ava never forgot. "Your reputation matters, but your character matters more. Reputation is what people think they know about you. Character is what remains when the truth arrives." The memory steadied her. Ava looked back at Officer Briggs. "I understand your concern," she said quietly. "But I have never accessed any examination materials improperly." Briggs closed the folder. "That is not what the report says." A heavy silence followed. Somewhere outside, a flag snapped in the spring breeze. Inside the auditorium, nobody moved. Nobody spoke. The celebration had vanished completely. In its place stood a question hanging over the room, one that seemed to grow larger with every passing second. If Ava Johnson was innocent, then why did the officer sound so certain that she was not? Officer Briggs had built a reputation on certainty. For nearly 20 years, he had worked the same district, worn the same badge, and trusted the same instinct that told him when something did not add up. Standing in the center of Jefferson High School's auditorium, he looked less like a guest at an academic ceremony and more like a man convinced he had uncovered something important. The folder beneath his arm contained a report that had arrived less than 48 hours earlier. An anonymous source had claimed that someone inside the state academic competition system had leaked restricted testing materials. Attached to the complaint was a list of names. Most had been crossed out during the investigation. One remained highlighted in yellow. Ava Johnson. Briggs had stared at that name for hours. The report described a student with unusually high scores, advanced legal knowledge, and a record so perfect that it almost seemed impossible. To him, perfection often raised questions. Now, surrounded by students and teachers, he felt more confident than ever. Principal Harris stepped closer. "Officer, I am asking again that we handle this privately." Briggs shook his head. "The situation is already public." His voice remained calm, but there was a firmness behind every word. Several school board members sitting near the stage exchanged concerned looks. Ava remained standing. Her hands stayed relaxed at her sides. The contrast between her composure and the growing tension around her only deepened Briggs's suspicion. He interpreted calmness as preparation. As if she had expected this moment. As if she had rehearsed for it. The thought settled deeper into his mind. A reporter near the back quietly opened a notebook. Another adjusted a camera lens. The story was spreading beyond the walls of the auditorium. Briggs welcomed the attention. He believed transparency would prove he was right. The report indicates access patterns that require explanation, he said. Someone used credentials connected to educational databases during restricted periods. A murmur rippled through the audience. Ava listened carefully. Something about the accusation felt incomplete. Vague. Built on assumptions rather than facts. Yet Briggs spoke with the confidence of someone presenting a finished case. The officer glanced down at the folder once more. Every page reinforced his conclusion. Every note pointed him toward the same student standing in front of him. What he never questioned was the source itself. He had examined the evidence. He had reviewed the timestamps. He had trusted the report. But he had never investigated the person who created it. Across the room, sunlight shifted across the polished floor. Dust floated through the golden beams like tiny suspended stars. The ceremony banners hung motionless above the stage. Excellence. Leadership. Integrity. The words seemed strangely distant now. Briggs looked directly at Ava. Until these questions are resolved, I intend to proceed according to protocol. The room fell silent again. Not because people agreed with him. Because they sensed he would not change course. Ava studied him carefully. For the first time, she realized something important. Officer Briggs was not acting out of uncertainty. He genuinely believed he was doing the right thing. That belief made him far more dangerous than someone acting out of simple hostility. Because people who believe they are right rarely stop long enough to consider they might be wrong. Ava felt the weight of the room settle on her shoulders, but she refused to let it bend her posture. The silence stretched between her and Officer Briggs while dozens of phones remained pointed in her direction. Every camera seemed to be waiting for her to panic, argue, or make a mistake. Instead, she took a slow breath. The polished floor reflected the bright auditorium lights beneath her shoes. Somewhere near the back row, a chair creaked. Nobody else moved. Ava looked directly at the officer. "May I see the warrant?" she asked. The question landed harder than anyone expected. Several teachers exchanged surprised glances. A few students lowered their phones for a moment. Even Principal Harris blinked. The words had not come from fear. They had come from confidence. Officer Briggs narrowed his eyes slightly. "That is not something you need to worry about right now." Ava remained calm. "Respectfully, sir, if I am being detained, I would like to understand the legal basis." More whispers spread through the auditorium. Briggs felt irritation flicker beneath his composed expression. Most teenagers reacted emotionally under pressure. Most avoided eye contact. Most looked to adults for rescue. Ava Johnson was doing none of those things. Instead, she was asking questions. Precise questions. The kind that slowed momentum. The kind that forced people to think. Briggs shifted the folder beneath his arm. "The investigation is active." "I understand," Ava replied. "But investigations and evidence are not the same thing." The words hung in the air. Principal Harris quietly exhaled. Several members of the school board sat forward in their seats. A reporter scribbled notes faster. Ava could feel her heartbeat, but her voice never wavered. Years of debate tournaments had taught her something important. The loudest person in the room rarely controlled the conversation. The person asking the right question often did. Briggs glanced around the auditorium. He did not like the direction this was going. What had begun as a straightforward action now felt increasingly complicated. Yet backing down was not an option. Not after making such a public entrance. Not after speaking so confidently. He pointed toward the aisle. "Miss Johnson, I am instructing you to come with me." Ava nodded slightly. "And I am willing to cooperate." The answer caught him off guard. "Then come with me." "I will," Ava said. "But before I do, I would like clarification regarding the allegation and the authority under which this action is being taken." The room became even quieter. Sunlight continued pouring through the tall windows, illuminating floating dust particles above the audience. The ceremony banner remained suspended above the stage. Excellence. Leadership. Integrity. Ava glanced toward it for only a second. Then she returned her attention to Briggs. Her mother had always told her that knowledge was not about winning arguments. It was about protecting the truth when the truth needed protection. At that moment, standing alone in front of an auditorium filled with strangers, classmates, and cameras, Ava realized she was doing exactly that. She was not challenging authority. She was asking authority to explain itself. And for the first time since entering the auditorium, Officer Briggs found himself without an immediate answer. The atmosphere inside the auditorium changed in a way that was impossible to ignore. What had started as a celebration now felt like a courtroom without a judge. Every face seemed frozen between curiosity and concern. Officer Briggs could feel the attention pressing in from every direction. The cameras. The teachers. The parents. The students. He had expected cooperation. He had expected confusion. What he had not expected was resistance built entirely from calm questions. That frustrated him more than he wanted to admit. "This is not a debate competition," he said. His voice echoed across the room. "You are not in a position to interrogate an officer." Ava remained still. The silver honor cord resting against her blazer caught a beam of sunlight. "I am not interrogating anyone, sir," she replied. "I am asking for clarification." A few students exchanged looks. Others continued recording. The difference between the two words seemed small, but everyone could hear it. Briggs tightened his grip on the folder. "You have already received enough clarification." "Respectfully, I have not received any evidence." The response came instantly. Calm. Measured. Unemotional. The room seemed to shrink around them. Principal Harris stepped forward again. "Perhaps we should pause and move this discussion to my office." "No," Briggs said firmly. "The matter has already gone too far." The statement surprised several people. Gone too far. The phrase lingered in the air. Ava noticed it immediately. So did the reporter near the back. Briggs had begun this confrontation believing he controlled the situation. Now the situation was controlling him. The officer opened the folder again and removed a single page. "The report places your credentials within proximity of restricted systems." Ava listened carefully. "My credentials?" "Yes." "School credentials or state credentials?" Briggs hesitated for a fraction of a second. The pause was small. Almost invisible. Yet Ava noticed it. So did several administrators sitting near the stage. "The report references credentials associated with your academic profile." "Associated by whom?" she asked. Another pause. This one longer. The silence spread through the auditorium like a shadow. Briggs felt irritation building beneath the surface. Every answer seemed to create another question. Every statement seemed less solid than it had when he reviewed it alone. Yet pride kept him moving forward. He had made a public accusation. Retreat now would make him look uncertain. Across the room, more people were arriving. Staff members stood near the entrance. Local education officials whispered among themselves. News of the confrontation had already begun spreading beyond the building. Ava could feel the pressure too. Her reputation. Her future. Years of work. All hanging in the balance. Yet strangely, she felt calmer than before. The more Briggs spoke, the more she realized something important. He kept referring to a report. He kept referring to conclusions. But he never referred to proof. The distinction mattered. Her mother had spent years teaching her that assumptions often were the costume of facts. The two could look identical until someone examined them closely. Ava looked directly at Briggs once more. "Sir," she said softly, "if the evidence is strong, then questions should not be a problem." For the first time since entering the auditorium, Officer Briggs found himself unable to respond immediately. And that silence spoke louder than anything either of them had said. The silence that followed felt heavier than every accusation that had come before it. Nobody rushed to fill it. Nobody seemed willing to move. Sunlight continued spilling through the tall windows, stretching across the polished floor in long golden bands. Dust drifted lazily through the bright air, untouched by the tension gripping the room. Ava stood quietly near the front row, her hands resting at her sides. She could hear the faint hum of the building's ventilation system. She could hear pages turning somewhere near the back of the auditorium. She could even hear the distant sound of a lawnmower outside on the football field. Ordinary sounds. Everyday sounds. Yet they felt strangely far away. Around her, hundreds of people waited for something to happen. A confession. An explanation. A resolution. Instead, they found themselves trapped inside uncertainty. Officer Briggs remained motionless. The folder beneath his arm suddenly seemed less important than before. The confidence he had carried into the auditorium was no longer filling the room the way it once had. Questions had begun to chip away at it. Small questions. Reasonable questions. Questions he should have been prepared to answer. Ava slowly looked toward the empty seat reserved for her mother once more. The chair remained vacant. For a brief moment, disappointment tugged at her chest. She had wanted her mother there when her name was called. She had imagined seeing her smile from the audience. She had imagined sharing the achievement together. Instead, she stood alone beneath the attention of strangers. Yet as quickly as the disappointment appeared, another memory surfaced. She remembered being 13 years old and sitting across from Naomi at their kitchen table. Rain had tapped softly against the apartment windows that evening while stacks of legal papers covered nearly every available surface. Ava had asked why her mother spent so many nights studying laws that most people never read. Naomi had smiled and pointed toward a thick binder. "Because rules only matter when people understand them," she had said. And when nobody asks questions, mistakes become power. The memory settled over Ava like a blanket. Warm. Steady. Familiar. She took a slow breath. The anxiety that had threatened to overwhelm her earlier seemed smaller now. Not gone. Just manageable. Across the auditorium, several students lowered their phones. Some teachers exchanged thoughtful looks. The mood had shifted again. What had begun as suspicion was slowly becoming reflection. People were no longer focused solely on Ava. They were beginning to examine the situation itself. That change was subtle but important. Principal Harris quietly folded his hands. The reporter stopped writing for a moment and simply observed. Even Officer Briggs appeared lost in thought. The bright banners hanging above the stage remained perfectly still. Excellence. Leadership. Integrity. Ava found herself looking at those words again. This time, they no longer felt like decorations for a ceremony. They felt like a test. Not of academic achievement. Of character. And while the entire auditorium waited for the next move, Ava stood calmly beneath the sunlight, understanding something that many people twice her age never learned. Truth did not become stronger when shouted. Sometimes its greatest strength appeared in moments of complete silence. The sound of the auditorium doors opening was so soft that most people would have missed it under normal circumstances. But nothing about this moment was normal. Heads turned almost instantly. A woman in a dark blue suit stepped inside carrying a leather briefcase tucked beneath one arm. Naomi Johnson paused near the entrance, taking in the scene before her. The raised phones. The silent crowd. The officer standing near her daughter. The expression on her face did not show panic. It showed focus. Principal Harris released a breath he seemed to have been holding for several minutes. "Professor Johnson," he said quietly. The title traveled through the room like an electric current. Several school board members immediately recognized her name. One superintendent straightened in his seat. A district attorney attending the ceremony as a guest looked toward the entrance and blinked twice in surprise. Officer Briggs turned. His confidence returned almost immediately. To him, this was simply a parent arriving late to defend her child. "Ma'am," he said, "we are handling an active investigation." Naomi nodded once. "I gathered that from the messages on my phone." Her voice was calm. Measured. Professional. She walked forward and stopped beside Ava. Mother and daughter exchanged a brief glance. No dramatic embrace. No whispered strategy. Just mutual understanding. The kind built over years. Briggs adjusted the folder beneath his arm. "Your daughter has been linked to restricted educational systems." Naomi listened carefully. Linked by evidence or linked by assumption? The question landed with the same precision Ava had demonstrated moments earlier. Several people noticed it immediately. Briggs felt irritation rise again. "The report is clear." "May I see it?" Naomi asked. After a brief hesitation, Briggs handed over several pages. The auditorium remained silent as Naomi reviewed them. One page. Then another. Then another. Her eyes moved quickly across the text. The district attorney near the front row stood and slowly approached. He appeared increasingly interested in what he was seeing. After less than a minute, Naomi lowered the pages. "Officer Briggs," she said softly, "who advised you to proceed publicly based on this report?" Briggs frowned. "The findings were sufficient." "No," Naomi replied. "They were incomplete." A murmur spread through the crowd. Briggs crossed his arms. "And how would you know that?" For the first time since entering the auditorium, Naomi allowed herself a faint smile. Not a smug smile. Not a victorious one. Simply the smile of someone recognizing a familiar mistake. The district attorney stepped forward before she could answer. "Actually," he said, looking directly at Briggs, "I think I can explain that." The room became perfectly still. The policy referenced throughout this report was revised 3 years ago. Briggs looked confused. The attorney continued. The revision established the exact standards required before any student could be publicly accused in cases involving educational data access. He paused. Then he looked toward Naomi. "Professor Johnson chaired the legal committee that drafted those protections." The words seemed to drain all sound from the auditorium. Briggs stared at Naomi. Then at the report in her hands. Then back at Naomi again. For the first time all afternoon, certainty disappeared from his face. Because the woman standing beside Ava did not merely understand the law he was relying on. She had helped write it. No one spoke for several seconds. The revelation settled over the auditorium slowly, like sunlight spreading across a dark room. Officer Briggs looked down at the report in Naomi's hands as though he were seeing it for the first time. The confidence that had carried him through the afternoon was gone. In its place stood uncertainty. The district attorney stepped closer and extended his hand toward the documents. "May I?" Naomi nodded and passed them over. He reviewed the pages carefully. Unlike before, nobody interrupted. Nobody whispered. Every eye followed the movement of those papers. The attorney turned to one section and stopped. Then another. His expression tightened. "Officer Briggs," he said calmly, "the policy requires independent verification before any public action can be taken against a student." Briggs remained silent. The attorney continued. "It also requires confirmation that the credentials in question actually belong to the person being investigated." He flipped another page. "That confirmation does not appear anywhere in this report." A murmur moved through the audience. Briggs swallowed. For the first time, he seemed less like an authority figure and more like a man realizing he had trusted the wrong information. Naomi did not raise her voice. She did not lecture him. She simply spoke with the patience of someone explaining a difficult lesson. "The purpose of these protections was never to shield wrongdoing," she said. "The purpose was to protect innocent people from assumptions." The words echoed through the auditorium. Ava watched her mother carefully. There was no anger in her expression. No desire to embarrass anyone. Only clarity. The kind of clarity that comes from years of understanding how easily mistakes can become consequences. The district attorney lowered the report. "Based on what I am seeing, there is insufficient evidence to support any action against Miss Johnson." The statement landed like a weight being lifted from the room. Several teachers visibly relaxed. Parents exchanged relieved glances. One student quietly lowered her phone. Principal Harris closed his eyes for a brief moment and released a long breath. Officer Briggs looked toward Ava. The auditorium seemed smaller now. Quieter. The attention that once supported him now felt impossible to ignore. "Miss Johnson," he said carefully, "it appears additional review is necessary." Ava could have celebrated. She could have pointed out every flaw in the accusation. She could have reminded everyone how publicly she had been questioned. Instead, she simply nodded. "I understand." The simplicity of her response surprised him. Naomi rested a hand lightly on her daughter's shoulder. "The law works best when people are willing to correct mistakes," she said. Briggs lowered his gaze for a moment. The words were not an attack. Somehow that made them harder to dismiss. Around them, the atmosphere continued to change. What had begun as a public accusation was becoming something else entirely. A lesson. Not about power. Not about authority. About humility. And standing beneath the banners hanging above the stage, Officer Briggs finally understood that the strongest people in the room were not the ones holding reports or badges. They were the ones who remained respectful even after being treated unfairly. The ceremony resumed nearly 20 minutes later, but it no longer felt like the same event. Something had changed. The tension that had filled the auditorium had slowly dissolved, replaced by a quiet sense of reflection. Sunlight continued pouring through the tall windows, bathing the stage in warm afternoon light. The blue banners still hung above the crowd. Excellence. Leadership. Integrity. Yet now those words seemed to carry more weight than before. Ava sat once again in the front row beside her mother. Neither of them spoke much. They did not need to. The storm had passed. Around them, students returned to their seats. Teachers straightened programs. Parents settled back into place. The nervous energy that had dominated the room earlier had faded into something calmer. Near the back of the auditorium, Officer Briggs remained standing alone. His folder rested at his side. For the first time all afternoon, he was not studying reports or scanning documents. He was thinking. The district attorney had quietly left. The reporter had closed her notebook. Principal Harris stepped back onto the stage and adjusted the microphone. The soft feedback hum briefly filled the room before disappearing. "Thank you all for your patience," he said. His voice sounded different now. More thoughtful. More deliberate. He glanced toward Ava. Then toward Naomi. Today was supposed to be a celebration of achievement. I believe it still is. A gentle ripple of applause moved through the audience. This time it was not loud. It was sincere. Moments later, the ceremony continued. One by one, names were called. Students crossed the stage. Families smiled. Cameras flashed. Eventually, Principal Harris reached the final page in his folder. He looked up. Our next honor scholar has demonstrated academic excellence, leadership, and remarkable character. Ava heard her name. The sound seemed distant at first. Then real. She stood and walked toward the stage. Her steps were steady. The silver cord resting against her blazer caught the sunlight once more. This time nobody whispered. Nobody questioned her presence. The entire auditorium watched in respectful silence. Ava accepted the award and turned toward the audience. For a brief moment, her eyes found her mother's. Naomi smiled. Not proudly. Not triumphantly. Simply warmly. The way a parent smiles when a lesson has been learned. Near the back of the room, Officer Briggs lowered his gaze. Then he did something unexpected. He joined the applause. Quietly. Respectfully. No speech followed. No public apology. No dramatic conclusion. Only understanding. The kind that arrives after certainty gives way to truth. As the ceremony ended, families slowly began leaving the auditorium. Conversations returned. Laughter returned. Life returned. Outside, a gentle spring breeze moved through the trees surrounding the school. The American flag near the entrance shifted softly against a bright blue sky. Ava and Naomi walked side by side toward the parking lot. Neither hurried. Neither looked back. The sunlight stretched long shadows across the sidewalk ahead of them. For several moments, they simply walked in silence. Then Naomi placed a hand lightly on her daughter's shoulder. Ava smiled. The breeze rustled through the nearby branches. Somewhere in the distance, a bell rang. And beneath the fading afternoon light, they continued forward together, leaving behind an auditorium where truth had spoken softly and still managed to be heard.